Joining me is Brad Friedman, investigative journalist. Check him out at Brad Blog. Brad, we've started to talk about this 2016 rigging of the election that is already kind of getting going. The idea is change how electoral votes are distributed within states. We had for a second, I mean, literally it was like a second after the 2012 election, the idea that maybe Republicans realized their policies are out of touch with the majority of Americans. You have to actually change your stances on issues to win. Then they said, nah, that's too difficult, or we don't want to do that. Let's just change how votes are counted. That's basically what we have here, right?
Yeah, you got it about right. I mean, this is the 2016 version of what they were doing in 2012, which was to keep people from being able to cast their vote at all. Now they're trying to change the entire system again, rather than just coming up with ideas that people might like and people might wish to vote for. That said, they've pulled back a little bit for now on their plans to game the 2016 election, at least through this electoral college scheme that they were looking at. I think some of the states have begun to realize, the Republicans in some of the states where they were doing this, have realized that this actually may not work out well for them, at least for the states themselves. So you see guys like Scott Walker up in Wisconsin, where the Republicans up there were looking at gaming the electoral college in that state. Bob McDonald in Virginia. Both of these guys, by the way, with presidential aspirations, but they're looking at their own states. They're governors of their own states, and they're realizing that while this may help to help somewhat take away Democratic votes in their state, electoral votes in their state, it's going to otherwise hurt their states, because right now swing states, like Wisconsin and Virginia, get a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of attention during the presidential campaigns. And if you basically change the system so that it evens out the number of electoral votes that each candidate is going to get, give or take, then all of a sudden the presidential candidates may not care at all about those states, may not lavish the attention and the money on them that they currently do. So they do seem to be backing off, but it's never beyond them to try to game the system however, whenever, wherever they can, rather than doing what you or I might do, which is try to win votes the old-fashioned way by being more appealing than the other guy.
So back in September, October, you and I were talking about voter suppression and election fraud, so on and so forth. And you basically said, this kind of happens every election cycle, where in the 6 months before the election, all of a sudden people start paying attention to these issues. And by and large, it's really too late to do anything. Fortunately, in the last election, it didn't actually turn the election. Do you think that is this an issue that is we're getting on it early enough such that it's going to be on people's radars, and maybe it will not get up to the next level of changing results? Or is it what has to be done, I guess, is the question.
Well, there's a lot to. Well, first on 2012, while it may not have turned the presidential election, there may have been a lot of local races that were affected by what happened. A recent study found that some 200,000 voters were unable to cast their vote on election day down in Florida, for example, because of the long lines. So these things did have a very serious effect in 2012, even if they didn't ultimately affect the presidential race itself.
Right.
And of course, I would argue that anybody who is unable to vote, any legal voter who is unable to cast their vote, has been affected, and that is an outrage, whatever state that takes place in, and however it might affect an election that they would have voted in. But yeah, after the 2012 election, immediately after, it looked like there was good news coming, in that Barack Obama on election night in his reelection speech said, we got to fix that. Indeed, even in his inaugural address, he talked about the problems with long lines during elections, and a bunch of Democrats began to file bills. And there are a bunch of bills now in both the House and Senate to deal with some of the problems that we saw in the 2012 election. I have some concerns because, Sandy Hook happened in December, not long after the election, and a lot of the focus seems to have gone over to gun safety issues, understandably. But what tends to happen here is that these election issues begin to slowly, go off the radar. People forget what happened in the election, and if those bills don't come up for debate and for a vote right away, people start to say, well, it's something that we'll deal with at another time. And then we find ourselves getting right up before the election, as I suspect we will in 2014, and we'll see these same problems emerging again.
Well, there's no shortage. There's no shortage of evidence that Americans do want a change to the electoral system. It's just not the one that is being proposed here by some Republicans, right? I mean, by a 2-to-1 margin, according to a new Gallup poll, people are in favor of eliminating the Electoral College, in favor of a national popular vote. So people want change, but I don't think anybody in power really is proposing the change Americans seem to actually want.
Well, yes. They are proposing changes to try to curb long lines, and I think that that's quite popular, frankly, among Americans. But as far as the Electoral College goes, I think that people want to do away with it. A lot of people want to do away with it because they don't really understand it. I have largely been agnostic when it comes to the Electoral College. This gaming that we're seeing now by Republicans of the Electoral College itself in some of these states, this is really one of the first things that's moved me to say, oh, okay, if you want to pretend that you're interested in the popular vote, then fine. We'll look at the popular vote for the entire country. Of course, Republicans aren't really interested in doing that. But yeah, some of these changes are quite popular, but people begin to forget about it, and it falls off the radar. But, I'm going to put something on your radar, which folks really need to pay attention to as it's coming up in the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's the Voting Rights Act. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which requires about 16 different jurisdictions around the country to get pre-clearance for new voting laws before they're able to be implemented due to the history of the discrimination in those jurisdictions. That provision of the Voting Rights Act is now being challenged by Republicans, and it will be heard
of course
in the
it
Supreme Court. And you know what? It very well could go away. And it was that section of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, that was successful in stopping the attempted photo ID restrictions in Texas and in South Carolina, and restoring some of the registration restrictions that had been put in place in Florida. So this could be really the most alarming development between now and 2016 if this important section of the Voting Rights Act simply goes away by a Supreme Court fiat, and that may well be the case, David.
All right, so Brad, we're definitely going to have you back to talk about that once it gets going. We've been speaking with Brad Friedman. Check out bradblog.com. I get the newsletter. It's fantastic. Brad, thanks as always for being on the show.
Always great talking with you, David Pakman. Keep up the good work, my friend.
All right, thanks.